They told him the submarine was dead, stripped clean, nothing but rusted metal and empty corridors. They were wrong about everything. He bought a decommissioned submarine, then found something still working inside. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now let's get started. James Carlson stood in the Naval Surplus Yard outside Seattle, staring at the hulking shape of USS Razorback, a diesel-electric submarine that had served from 1944 through 1970, decommissioned, stripped, scheduled for scrap, and somehow inexplicably available for purchase to private citizens. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the yard. Final call for Lot 41, USS Razorback, submarine, Palau class, hull stripped per naval regulations. Sold as is, where is. Current bid stands at $15,000. James raised his paddle. $20,000. The crowd turned to look at him. Scrap dealers mostly. A few maritime salvage companies. They had stopped bidding at $10,000 because the cost of cutting up the submarine exceeded the value of the metal. But James wasn't buying it for scrap. $20,000 going once, twice. Sold to bidder $312. As James signed the paperwork, a man in an expensive suit approached. Victor Cross, owner of Pacific Marine Salvage. He had the look of someone who made fortunes from other people's cast-offs. "Mr. Carlson," Cross said smoothly. "Interesting purchase. Bit large for a conversation piece, don't you think?" "I have plans for it," James replied, not looking up from the forms. "I'm sure you do, which is why I'd like to make you an offer. $50,000, right now. Saves you the headache of dealing with maritime regulations, dock fees, environmental inspections." James finally looked at him. "If it's such a headache, why are you offering $50,000 for something you wouldn't bid $20 for? Cross's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I've learned not to underestimate what might be left inside these old boats. The Navy says they strip them clean, but sometimes things get missed. Storage compartments, sealed sections, equipment that was forgotten. And you think I'm going to find something valuable? I think you already know there's something valuable. Otherwise you wouldn't have bid against the scrap value." Cross pulled out a business card. "My offer stands for 48 hours. After that, well, maritime salvage gets complicated. Accidents happen. Old submarines are dangerous places." He walked away before James could respond. The Razorback was towed to a private dock James had leased. 312 feet of rusted steel. Most of the external equipment had been removed. The deck guns were gone. The periscopes cut off. But the hull was intact. And that's what mattered. James had spent 6 months researching before the auction. The Razorback had an interesting history. Toward the end of her service, she'd been used for classified testing. The official records were vague. Something about experimental sonar systems. Then in 1970, she'd been decommissioned suddenly. Not gradually phased out like most submarines. Just pulled from service in the middle of a deployment and sent straight to the boneyard. That sudden decommissioning had caught his attention. Ships didn't just stop mid-deployment without reason. He spent the first week just walking through the interior. The Navy had indeed stripped most equipment. The torpedo tubes were empty. The engine room gutted, living quarters bare. But they'd left the basic structure intact. Hull, bulkheads, hatches. And as James moved through the boat, he noticed things that didn't match the official schematics. A sealed hatch in the forward section that shouldn't exist. Ventilation ducts that led nowhere on the blueprints. Electrical conduits that went to empty walls. On day 8, he found the first real anomaly. In what should have been a simple storage compartment, one of the bulkhead panels felt wrong. He tapped it with his wrench. The sound was different, not the dull thud of solid metal. More hollow. He examined the welds carefully. They looked naval standard at first glance, but under closer inspection, they were newer than they should be. The surrounding metal showed decades of corrosion. These welds were maybe 30 years old. Someone had sealed something after the boat was supposedly stripped. James spent 2 days carefully cutting through the welds without damaging whatever might be behind them. When the panel finally came free, cool air rushed out. Moving air. Circulated air. Behind the panel was a corridor, 10 feet long, leading to another hatch. This one was sealed with a wheel lock mechanism that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. His heart pounded as he tried the wheel. It didn't budge. Locked or rusted, he couldn't tell. But along the frame of the hatch were words stenciled in faded yellow paint. Project Deep Echo. Authorized personnel only. James had never heard of Project Deep Echo. It wasn't in any of the declassified documents he'd reviewed, wasn't mentioned in the Razorback service history, didn't appear in any naval archives he could access, which meant it was still classified. 50 years later, still secret. He photographed the hatch and the stenciled words, then spent the evening searching every database he could access. Nothing. The project didn't officially exist. The next morning, he returned with penetrating oil and patience. He worked the wheel lock slowly. After an hour, it finally began to turn. The mechanism inside was well maintained, protected from the salt air that had corroded everything else. When the lock fully disengaged, he heard something that made him freeze. A hum. Electrical. Steady. Something behind that hatch was powered. Active. Running on electricity that shouldn't exist in a dead submarine that had been abandoned for over 50 years. James pulled the hatch open slowly. Beyond it was darkness and the smell of ozone. The smell of active electronics. He shined his flashlight inside. The space was larger than the corridor suggested, maybe 15 feet square, and it was full of equipment, not stripped, not removed, pristine. The walls lined with panels of instruments, screens, displays. Most were dark, but several showed glowing indicators, green lights pulsing in steady rhythm. In the center of the space was a console, and on that console, a single red light blinked. On, off, on, off. Patient, waiting. James stepped inside. The temperature was cooler here, climate controlled. The equipment hummed with quiet efficiency. Power was coming from somewhere. Batteries couldn't last 50 years. There had to be another source. He approached the console carefully. Beside the blinking light was a small screen. As he got closer, text appeared. Passive monitoring mode. Day 18,627. System integrity 91%. Awaiting activation sequence. 18,000 days. That was over 50 years. This system had been running, monitoring, waiting. For the entire time the submarine had sat in the boneyard. Monitoring what? James scanned the equipment. Most of it looked like sonar gear, but far more sophisticated than anything that should have existed in 1970. Multiple frequency bands, signal processing that looked decades ahead of its time, and something else. A large cylindrical device mounted vertically in the corner. It looked like a speaker, or a projector, but the frequency range marked on its housing went far below what humans could hear. This wasn't just listening equipment. It was broadcasting equipment, for sounds that traveled through water at frequencies that could go for thousands of miles. James's mind raced. During the Cold War, both sides had experimented with submarine communication systems, ways to talk to submerged boats without them having to surface. Most methods were slow, limited. But what if someone had developed something better? Something that worked at a range and depth that made submarines truly invisible. That would be worth keeping secret, even 50 years later. A sound echoed through the submarine's hull. Footsteps on the deck above. James killed his flashlight and froze. Voices. Multiple people. Moving through the boat with purpose. They weren't being careful. Weren't trying to hide their presence. Forward section, someone called out. He's been working in the forward section. Look for fresh tool marks, freshly cut welds. They were searching for exactly what James had found. He backed into the equipment room and quietly pulled the hatch closed. The wheel lock wouldn't engage from inside. If they found the corridor, they'd see the open hatch. He needed to hide or find another way out. The room had one other feature he'd noticed. Another hatch. Smaller. At floor level. Maybe a crawl space. Maybe an emergency escape route. He pulled it open as quietly as possible. Beyond was a tunnel. Narrow. Dark. Leading deeper into the bow of the submarine. Into sections that officially didn't exist on any schematic he'd seen. Behind him, he heard the outer hatch being opened, the one he'd cut through. They'd found the corridor. In here, a voice said. The equipment room. Looks like he's been inside. James crawled into the tunnel and pulled the hatch closed behind him. In the pitch darkness, he heard the wheel lock on the main hatch turning. They were entering the room, and he had no idea where this tunnel led, or if there was another way out. The crawl space seemed to go on forever. James moved as quietly as possible through the darkness. His flashlight would give him away, so he navigated by touch. The metal walls were cool and damp. The air smelled stale but not toxic. Behind him, he heard muffled voices. They'd discovered the floor hatch. Someone was arguing about whether to follow him into the tunnel. Then a different sound. Electronic. A high-pitched whine building in intensity. Coming from the equipment room. Someone had activated something. And whatever it was powering up fast. The whine became a pulse. Deep. Rhythmic. He could feel it in his chest. A subsonic frequency that rattled his bones. The voices behind him turned panicked. Shouting. Then the sound of rapid footsteps retreating. The pulsing continued. Growing stronger. The entire submarine hull began to vibrate in harmony with it. James crawled faster, desperate to put distance between himself and whatever was happening in that room. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger space. He risked using his flashlight. The beam revealed a chamber unlike anything he'd expected. Curved walls covered in acoustic tiles, a domed ceiling, and in the center, suspended by cables, was a sphere, maybe 6 feet in diameter. Its surface rippled like liquid metal. On the sphere's surface, patterns of light began to appear, moving, changing, and through the submarine's hull, through thousands of tons of water and steel, James heard something impossible. A voice, not speaking English, not speaking any language he recognized, but unmistakably a voice, coming from deep water, coming from somewhere no human voice should be able to reach. And the sphere was answering. James pressed himself against the curved wall, his flashlight beam fixed on the sphere. The patterns of light moved across its surface like oil on water. Beautiful, hypnotic, terrifying. The voice from the deep continued. Not words exactly, more like tones, frequencies that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his skull. The sphere pulsed in response, its surface rippling with each tone. This wasn't equipment. This was communication. Active communication with something in the ocean. Something that had been waiting 50 years for someone to wake up the system. The voices behind him in the tunnel had gone silent. Either they'd retreated or they were listening to the same impossible transmission he was hearing. James forced himself to think logically. This chamber was clearly designed for acoustic research. The tiles on the walls were sound dampening. The sphere was some kind of transducer, converting electrical signals into sound waves and receiving them back. But the technology was wrong. Too advanced. In 1970, nothing like this existed. Sonar was crude. Communications were simple Morse code on fixed frequencies. This was something else entirely. The sphere's pulsing began to slow. The patterns of light faded. Whatever exchange had been happening was ending. The subsonic vibration that rattled the hull decreased to a gentle hum. Then silence. Complete silence. James waited, barely breathing. After 5 minutes, he risked moving. He approached the sphere cautiously. Up close, he could see it wasn't solid. The surface was a membrane, flexible, responsive. Tiny filaments connected it to the cables above, carrying power and data. Around the base were control panels, older than the sphere itself. These looked like they were from the 70s. Analog displays, physical switches, but they'd been maintained. Someone had kept this equipment functional all these years. One panel showed a recording device, tape reels, currently stopped, but the tape position indicator showed it had been running, recording the entire exchange. James's hand hovered over the playback button. Every instinct told him to listen, to understand what he'd just witnessed, but another part of his mind screamed warnings. This was classified for reasons that might be deadly. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel. Someone was coming. Fast. James killed his light and pressed himself into the shadows behind the sphere. A beam of light swept the chamber. "He's here," a voice called back. "The main chamber. Jesus Christ, it's real. It's all still here." 2 men entered. Not Navy. Not official. They wore civilian clothes and carried handheld radios. One was young, maybe 30. The other older, 50 plus. Both moved with military precision. The younger one approached the control panel. "Did it activate? Did the transmission complete?" "Look at the tape position," the older one replied. "It recorded something. We need to secure this before Carlson hears it." They knew his name. This wasn't random. They'd been watching him, waiting for him to find this place and wake up the system. "Too late," James said, stepping out of the shadows. "I already heard it." Both men spun toward him. The younger one reached for something in his jacket, but the older one stopped him with a raised hand. "Mr. Carlson," the older man said calmly, My name is David Pierce. I was a sonar technician on this boat, 53 years ago, and I've been waiting a very long time for someone to find this room. James kept his distance. Who else is on my boat? Just us, Pierce said. And Victor Cross and his men. They left when the system activated. Cross is smart enough to know some things are above his pay grade, but not smart enough to stay away in the first place. Pierce smiled without humor. Cross was hired to make sure nobody found this. When you bought the boat, he was supposed to buy it from you or scare you off. But then you actually opened the chamber, you activated the listening protocol, and now everything's changed. What is this? James gestured at the sphere. What am I looking at? Project Deep Echo, Pierce said. We were testing long-range acoustic communication. The Cold War was getting hot. We needed ways to coordinate submarine fleets without surface contact, without satellites, just sound through water. He approached the control panel. The sphere was designed to send and receive at frequencies that travel thousands of miles through the ocean, below the thermal layers, below where any normal sonar operates. In theory, a submarine in the Pacific could talk to one in the Atlantic. In theory? The first test worked, Pierce said. Too well. We sent a signal, and something answered. The words hung in the air like smoke. Something answered. James repeated slowly. Not someone. Something. The younger man spoke for the first time. Show him the logs. He needs to understand what we're dealing with. Pierce pulled a weathered notebook from his jacket. July 7th, 1970. We conducted the first full power test. Sent a patterned pulse sequence. Standard communication protocol. 2 hours later, we received a response. Same pattern, but inverted, like a mirror image. He flipped pages. We thought it was an echo, a reflection off some underwater feature. So we sent a different pattern, more complex, mathematical, prime number sequences. Again, we got a response. Not an echo, an answer. The sequence continued. Someone or something was completing our mathematical patterns. James felt cold. You're saying something intelligent responded? We're saying something understood mathematics, Pierce corrected. We sent increasingly complex sequences for 3 days. It answered every one. Then on day 4, it initiated contact. Sent us patterns we hadn't created, we recorded everything, tried to decode it, and then command shut us down. Why? Because on day 5 the response changed. It wasn't just patterns anymore, it was instructions. Step-by-step directions for modifying our equipment, for increasing power, for reaching deeper. Pierce's hands shook slightly. We were young, curious. We followed the instructions. And when we activated the modified system, we heard what you just heard. A voice, speaking in frequencies that shouldn't be able to carry meaning, coming from a depth where nothing we know about can survive. James's mind raced. And the Navy's response was to seal this up and sink the submarine? The Navy's response was to classify everything above top secret, scatter the crew, and make the Razorback disappear from service. We were told the project failed, that the equipment malfunctioned, that we'd imagined the whole thing. But I was there. I heard it. And I've spent 53 years wondering what we made contact with. The younger man moved to the recording device. The tape. We need to hear what it just recorded. This is the first activation in over 50 years. If it responded again, we need to know what it said. Wait, James said. Before we do this, I need to understand something. If you were ordered to never speak about this, why are you here now? Why risk everything? Pierce met his eyes. Because 3 months ago, ships started reporting anomalies. Pacific Fleet, strange sonar contacts, signals that match the frequencies we used in Deep Echo. Something down there is trying to reach us. And nobody in command knows what it is because they buried the only program that ever made contact. He gestured at the equipment. You bought this submarine by accident, but you opened this chamber for a reason. Maybe coincidence, maybe something else. Either way, we're here now, and we have a chance to answer a question that's been waiting 53 years. What question? What's down there? Pierce said simply. And what does it want? The younger man pressed the playback button before James could stop him. The tape reels began to turn. Static filled the chamber. Then, emerging from the noise, the same tones they'd heard earlier, but clearer now, more defined. Pierce watched the analog displays. The pattern's different. It's not repeating what we sent. It's creating something new. The tones shifted, dropped in frequency, and suddenly James could hear structure, not words, but meaning. Mathematical. Precise. A sequence of pulses that his engineer's mind recognized immediately. "That's binary," he whispered. "It's sending data in binary code." The younger man was already writing it down, ones and zeros filling his notebook pages. The transmission lasted 3 minutes. Then silence. Pierce studied the numbers. His face went pale. "This isn't random, this is formatted. File structure. Header information. It's sending us a file." "A file of what?" "Coordinates," Pierce said, his voice shaking. "Depth, latitude, longitude, and a date. September 15th, 2 weeks from now." James felt ice in his veins. "It's telling us where to meet it." The younger man looked at the coordinates. "That's the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in the ocean. Nothing we have can reach that depth. Nothing human." Pierce met James's eyes. "It knows that, which means either it's coming up, or it's telling us we need to build something that can go down." A sound echoed through the submarine. Metal on metal. The outer hatches being opened, not carefully this time. Forced. "That'll be Cross," Pierce said. "He must have called for backup. We need to leave. Now." "I'm not leaving my submarine," James said. "Your submarine just became a national security incident. You think Cross is working alone? Someone hired him. Someone with resources. And they're not going to let us walk away with that recording." Voices shouted from multiple directions. They were being surrounded. Pierce grabbed the tape reel. "There's an emergency escape trunk in the aft section. If we move now, we can reach it before they cover all exits." "And go where?" "Cross knows where I live. Knows everything about me. Then we go somewhere he doesn't know about," the younger man said. "I have a safe house, off-grid. We need time to decode this fully, to understand what we're dealing with." "Who are you?" James asked. "Name's Michael Chen, Naval Intelligence. I've been monitoring this project for 12 years. Ever since signals started appearing that matched Deep Echo's signature. When you bought the Razorback, I knew this day was coming. More sounds. Closer now. They had minutes at most." James looked at the sphere, at the equipment that had waited 50 years to wake up, at the impossible proof that something intelligent existed in the deepest parts of the ocean. "Fine," he said. "We run, but that recording stays with me. This is my boat, my discovery. I'm not handing it over to people who've been lying about this for 50 years. Pierce handed him the tape. "Then let's move, because if Cross catches us with this, discovery rights won't matter. We'll disappear like the original crew almost did." They ran. They moved through the submarine's corridors in near darkness, Pierce leading the way by memory. The voices behind them were organized now, multiple teams searching in coordinated patterns. "The escape trunk is forward section port side," Pierce whispered. "Built for emergency evacuation if the boat went down. Opens directly to the exterior hull." "We're in dry dock," James hissed. "That's a 30-foot drop to the water. Better than whatever Cross has planned for us." Chen brought up the rear, listening to the pursuit. "They're sweeping systematically, 3 teams minimum, professional, not just salvage workers." They reached the escape trunk, a vertical tube with a ladder and 2 hatches, one leading into the submarine, one leading out. Pierce spun the interior wheel lock. "This opens. Everyone in the dock is going to hear it. We'll have maybe 2 minutes before they converge on this position." "Then we better move fast," James said. Pierce yanked the hatch open. The sound echoed through the hull like a gunshot. Shouts erupted immediately. Footsteps pounded toward their location. Chen went up first, climbing the ladder with military efficiency. Pierce followed. James grabbed the tape reel, tucked it inside his jacket, and started climbing. Above, Chen was working the exterior hatch. "It's seized. The mechanism's corroded." "Put your back into it," Pierce grunted. Below, flashlight beams swept into the corridor. "They're at the escape trunk. Block the exits." Chen threw his weight against the wheel. Something gave with a screech of protesting metal. The hatch swung open. Night air rushed in, cool and damp. They emerged on top of the submarine's hull. The dock lights were off, leaving them in darkness. Below, the water looked black and cold, 30 feet down to a surface that might be shallow or might have debris just beneath. "We jump on 3, Chen said. "Wait," James said. "My truck. Keys are still in the ignition. If we can reach it—" "Your truck's the first thing they'll watch," Pierce interrupted. "We need to disappear. Really disappear. Swimming is our only option." Footsteps rang on metal below. Someone was climbing the escape trunk ladder. "1," Chen counted. James looked at the water. At his age, this was a bad idea. But staying was worse. 2. The hatch below them burst open. A flashlight beam swept across the hull. 3. They jumped. The impact knocked the breath from James's lungs. Cold water closed over his head. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't tell which way was up. Then survival instincts kicked in. He kicked toward the surface, broke through gasping. Pierce and Chen surfaced nearby. Above them, men shouted from the submarine's deck. Flashlight beams swept the water. "The dock building," Pierce said, already swimming. "Get to the pilings. Stay in shadow." They swam parallel to the submarine, using its bulk to shield them from the lights. The water was frigid. James's muscles were already going numb. He forced himself to keep moving. Behind them, someone shouted orders. "Get a boat in the water, don't let them reach shore." They reached the pilings under the dock structure, old wood and barnacles. Chen found a maintenance ladder and started climbing. Pierce followed. James came last, his hands so cold he could barely grip the rungs. Above the waterline, they crouched on a maintenance platform. The sounds of pursuit echoed across the dock. A small boat motor started up. "We can't stay here," Chen said. 5 minutes and they'll have this whole area locked down. "There's a truck yard 2 blocks north," Pierce said. "If we can reach it, I know someone who owes me a favor. He can get us out of the city." 2 blocks through a commercial district soaking wet in the middle of the night, James said. "We'll stand out like beacons." "Better ideas?" James thought for a moment. "The harbor master's office. It's Sunday night. Nobody's there. They keep spare coveralls for dock workers. We change. Walk out like we belong here." Chen nodded slowly. That might actually work. They moved through the shadows between buildings. The harbor master's office was a simple prefab structure near the main gate. The door lock was old. Chen had it open in 30 seconds. Inside they found coveralls, rain jackets, hard hats. The uniform of dock workers. They changed quickly, hiding their wet clothes in a storage locker. "Now we walk out the front gate like we're ending a shift," James said. "And if they're watching the gate? Then we're 3 workers going home, not worth their attention." They emerged from the office looking tired and dirty, exactly like men at the end of a long shift. The dock area was crawling with Cross's people now, but they were focused on the water and the submarine, looking for swimmers, not for workers. The main gate was ahead. 1 security guard, older man, reading a magazine. He glanced up as they approached. "Evening," James said casually. "Hell of a commotion back there. Someone said something about trespassers." The guard nodded. "Yeah, some kind of incident on that old submarine. You guys see anything?" "We were in the warehouse. Didn't see nothing." The guard waved them through without checking IDs. They walked 2 blocks before any of them spoke. "That was too easy," Chen finally said. "Don't jinx it," Pierce muttered. They caught a bus heading north, paid cash, sat in the back. 3 tired dock workers going home. Invisible. Chen's safe house was in Bellingham, an hour north. An old fishing cabin on the water that officially belonged to a deceased uncle. No paper trail connecting it to him. They arrived at 2 in the morning. Chen checked for surveillance, found none, and let them inside. The cabin was basic but functional. Chen immediately pulled out a laptop and started working while Pierce built a fire. James sat at the small table and carefully removed the tape reel from his jacket. Miraculously, it had survived the swim, sealed in plastic, protected. "We need to digitize this," Chen said. "Convert it to a format we can analyze properly. You have the equipment for that?" Chen opened a closet. Inside was surveillance gear, communications equipment, and a high-end audio analysis system. "I told you I've been monitoring this project for 12 years. I came prepared." It took an hour to set up the equipment and transfer the tape to digital format. Once converted, Chen ran it through audio analysis software. The patterns appeared on screen. Binary code, just as Pierce had said. But there was more. Embedded in the signal were additional layers, harmonics that carried information below the primary frequency. "It's steganography," Chen said. "Hidden data inside the obvious message. The coordinates were just the surface layer. There's something else here." He isolated the hidden frequency and ran it through decryption algorithms. Text began to appear on screen. Not binary this time. ASCII characters. English words. But the message made no sense. "The door opens when the tide remembers. The deep calls to those who built the key. September 15. 37.59 north, 142.12 east, depth 11,000 meters. Come alone or come together, but come prepared to listen. Pierce read it twice. What the hell does that mean? The tide remembers, the deep calls. It's not random, James said. Look at the coordinates. That's the exact location of the Challenger Deep, the deepest surveyed point in the Mariana Trench. Chen pulled up a map. 11,000 meters. That's deeper than anything human-made can go. The deepest diving submersible only reaches 10,000, and that's cutting-edge technology from this year. So it's impossible, Pierce said. Or it's a test, James replied, to see if we're capable of meeting it on its terms. Chen was already searching databases. There's something else. September 15th isn't random either. Look at this. He pulled up astronomical data. September 15th is a new moon, and the tidal patterns that day show an unusual alignment. Spring tide, maximum tidal range. The ocean's gravitational patterns will be at their most extreme. The tide remembers, Pierce repeated. Maybe it's not poetry. Maybe it's a reference to tidal cycles, to ocean patterns that repeat over time. James studied the message again. Something about it felt familiar. The phrasing, the structure. He'd seen technical writing like this before. Instructions disguised as riddles. The door opens when the tide remembers, he said slowly. What if it's not talking about ocean tides? What if it's talking about data, information that repeats in cycles? Chen caught on immediately. The original transmissions. From 1970, we sent patterns that repeated, mathematical sequences with rhythms, with cycles. And if those cycles align with the new moon tidal patterns, Pierce was following now, it creates a resonance, a frequency window where communication is clearest. That's why it specified the date, James said. September 15th is when the conditions repeat, when the door opens, when whatever is down there can communicate most clearly with the surface. Chen leaned back. So we have 2 weeks to build or find a submersible capable of reaching 11,000 meters, to travel to the most remote part of the Pacific Ocean, and to meet something that's been waiting 53 years to talk. That's impossible, Pierce said flatly. The logistics alone, the cost, the permits, the equipment. We'd need military support, government backing, everything that's been trying to bury this project for half a century. Then we don't go through official channels, James said. Both men looked at him. I bought a submarine at public auction, James continued. Officially decommissioned, stripped clean, worthless. Except it wasn't stripped. It contained functional classified equipment, which means the Navy violated their own decommissioning protocols, which means any secrecy they're trying to maintain is built on fraud. He pulled out his phone. I know a maritime lawyer, someone who specializes in salvage rights and government overreach. We threatened to go public with everything. The equipment, the recordings, the fact that they've been monitoring signals for years and hiding it. They'll classify everything, Chen said. National security. They'll bury us in legal action. Only if we give them time, James replied. We go loud, right now. Post the recordings online. Send copies to every major news organization. Make it impossible to suppress. Pierce shook his head. That's incredibly dangerous. You'd be painting a target on your back, on all our backs. We already have targets on our backs, James said. Cross and his people aren't going to stop, and whoever hired them has resources we can't match. Our only protection is making this public, making ourselves too visible to disappear quietly. Chen considered this. There's a maritime research organization, private funding. They've been pushing for deep ocean exploration. If we approach them with proof of something unprecedented at the Challenger Deep, they might be willing to sponsor an expedition. In 2 weeks, they have a deep diving submersible, the Orpheus. It's rated to 11,500 meters, and it's currently in the Philippines for sea trials, 2 days from the Mariana Trench. Pierce was pulling up information on his phone. The Orpheus is piloted by Dr. Sarah Chen. No relation. She's made 17 dives below 10,000 meters. If anyone could get us down there, it's her. Then we contact her, James said. We show her the recordings. We give her proof that there's something down there worth investigating. And if she says no, then we find another way, James said. Because in 2 weeks something in the deepest part of the ocean is expecting contact, and I intend to be there when the door opens. Outside, dawn was breaking. They had 14 days to accomplish the impossible. The hunt for them had only just begun. Dr. Sarah Chen didn't believe them at first. She listened to their story in the cramped cabin, her expression shifting from skepticism to fascination to something like fear. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, replaying the audio file for the third time. "You're claiming that in 1970 the Navy made contact with something intelligent in the deep ocean, something that's been waiting 53 years to communicate again, and it wants to meet at the Challenger Deep in 13 days. "That's correct," James said. "And you broke into a decommissioned submarine, activated classified equipment, received this transmission, then fled from private military contractors who are trying to suppress the information." "Also correct." Sarah sat back studying the three men. She was 42, with the weathered look of someone who spent more time underwater than on land. Her research organization, Deep Ocean Initiative, had made headlines 3 years ago when she discovered previously unknown hydrothermal vent ecosystems at extreme depths. "This is insane," she said finally. "Even if I believed you, which I'm not saying I do, the logistics are impossible. The Orpheus is in the Philippines conducting pressure tests. It's not designed for this kind of speculative mission." "What if it's not speculative?" Chen pulled up his laptop. "I've been monitoring acoustic anomalies in the Pacific for 12 years. Look at this data." He showed her patterns. Signals detected by deep ocean monitoring stations. Low frequency, repeating at intervals that matched tidal cycles. "This could be geological," Sarah said. "Underwater volcanic activity, tectonic movement." "That's what the official reports claim," Chen agreed. "But geological sources don't create mathematical patterns. They don't respond to transmitted signals. And they don't suddenly increase in frequency and complexity starting 3 months ago." He overlaid the data with the deep echo transmission patterns from 1970. The correlation was undeniable. Sarah's expression changed. "You're saying whatever they contacted in 70 is trying to reach us now, and we've been ignoring it because we classified the only program that could interpret the signals?" "Yes." She stood and walked to the cabin window, looking out at the water. "I've been down there. To the deepest places humans can reach. It's not empty like people think. There's life everywhere, adapted to pressure and darkness in ways we barely understand. But intelligent life? That communicates with technology? That's a completely different claim." "I know how it sounds," James said. 3 days ago, I was a marine engineer who bought a submarine as a retirement project. Now I'm asking you to risk your career, your funding, and possibly your life based on a recording that most people would call a hoax. Why should I believe you're not running some kind of scam?" Pierce spoke for the first time since Sarah arrived. "Because I was there in 1970. I was 22 years old. I heard the first transmissions. I helped decode the patterns. And when command shut us down and scattered the crew, I spent 53 years wondering if I'd imagined it. This recording proves I didn't. Something down there has been waiting, and it's running out of patience." Sarah turned to face him. "What do you mean, running out of patience?" Pierce pulled out his notebook, the one with the original data from Deep Echo. The first transmissions in 70 were simple, mathematical, almost playful, testing to see if we could understand. But the recent signals Chen's been monitoring? They're different, more urgent. The intervals are decreasing, the complexity increasing. It's like someone trying to get attention, starting quiet and polite, then getting louder when ignored. And if we continue to ignore it? I don't know, Pierce admitted. But in 70, when we activated the full power system against orders, the response scared command enough to bury the entire program. Whatever is down there has capabilities we don't understand. I'd rather meet it on diplomatic terms than find out what happens when it stops being patient. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she pulled out her phone. "I need to make some calls. If I'm going to do this, I need my full team. And we need to move the Orpheus to the Mariana Trench immediately." "You believe us?" James asked. "I believe the data," Sarah replied. "And I believe that if there's even a 5% chance something intelligent exists at those depths, we have an obligation to investigate. The ocean covers 70% of our planet. We've explored less than 5% of it. Assuming we're alone down there is arrogance." She made 3 calls. To her technical lead, her funding director, her submersible pilot. Each conversation was brief and urgent. When she finished, she looked at James. "The Orpheus can reach the coordinates by September 14th. 1 day early. We'll need that time to prepare, to calibrate equipment, to install the acoustic transceiver from your submarine." "You want to bring the Deep Echo equipment?" If we're going to communicate, we need the right tools. Your sphere and transmission system are 50 years ahead of anything we have. We need to extract it from the submarine and integrate it with the Orpheus. That's going to take time and expertise. Chen nodded. I can do it. But we need to get back to the dock. And Cross's people are still searching for us. Let them search, Sarah said. We're not going back to Seattle. I have a research facility in Monterey. Full machine shop, ocean access. We bring the submarine there, extract the equipment properly. Then we ship everything to the Philippines and integrate it with the Orpheus. How do we move a submarine? James asked. Sarah smiled. Same way the Navy does. We hire a heavy lift ship. It'll cost about $200,000. But my organization's emergency research fund can cover it, assuming you're willing to sign over salvage rights. The submarine's yours, James said. I just want answers. Over the next 10 days, they worked around the clock. The Razorback was loaded onto a heavy lift vessel and transported to Monterey. Sarah's team extracted the deep echo equipment with surgical precision. Every component was documented, tested, and packed for transport. Chen and Pierce worked with Sarah's engineers to design an interface between the vintage system and the Orpheus's modern electronics. It was like connecting a 1970 computer to a smartphone, theoretically possible but requiring custom solutions at every step. James coordinated logistics, permits, transport, supplies. His engineering background proved invaluable as they solved problem after problem. On September 10th, they flew to the Philippines. The Orpheus was waiting in Guam, being prepared for the deepest dive of its operational life. The submersible was impressive, a titanium sphere 7 feet in diameter, reinforced to withstand the crushing pressure of the ocean's deepest point. It could accommodate 3 people in extremely cramped conditions. We'll need to decide who goes down, Sarah said as they inspected the vessel. 3 seats, 5 people who want answers. You're piloting, James said. That's non-negotiable. Agreed, which leaves 2 seats. Pierce spoke up. I'm 75 years old. I've got a bad hip and worse lungs. I'll be more useful on the surface monitoring transmissions. Chen nodded. I'll stay topside too, run communications, coordinate with the surface vessel, which left James and Sarah to make the descent. You sure about this? Sarah asked James. 11,000 meters, 3 hours down, 3 hours up. If anything goes wrong, rescue is impossible. I bought a submarine to find answers, James said. I'm not stopping now. September 14th arrived with perfect weather. Calm seas. Clear skies. The support vessel anchored above the Challenger Deep at dawn. The Orpheus hung from the ship's crane. Inside, James and Sarah ran final systems checks. The deep echo equipment was integrated and functional. The acoustic transceiver was calibrated. Everything was ready. Last chance to back out, Sarah said as technicians sealed the hatch. James looked through the tiny viewport at the ocean surface. Somewhere below, 11,000 meters down, something was waiting. Let's go meet our neighbors, he said. The crane lowered them into the water. The Orpheus detached and began its descent. The first 1,000 meters passed quickly. Sunlight faded to twilight to complete darkness. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. Temperature dropped. At 3,000 meters, they passed through the zone where most deep-sea life existed. Occasional bioluminescent creatures drifted past the viewport, beautiful and alien. At 6,000 meters, the bathyscaph's hull began to creak. Normal, Sarah assured him. The titanium sphere compressing under the pressure, designed to do exactly that. At 8,000 meters, they entered complete darkness and silence. The only sounds were their breathing and the hum of life support systems. At 10,000 meters, Sarah activated the deep echo system. The sphere's surface began to glow softly. The acoustic transceiver powered up, and through the hull they heard the ocean. Not water moving, not pressure. Something else. A presence. Vast. Patient. Waiting. We're at 11,000 meters, Sarah said. This is as deep as we can go. James checked the coordinates. They were exactly where the transmission specified. September 15th had just begun. The new moon was overhead, though they couldn't see it through thousands of meters of water. The tide was remembering. The acoustic system registered something. A signal. Coming from below them. From depths even the Orpheus couldn't reach. The sphere responded automatically. The patterns it had been programmed with in 1970. Mathematical. Peaceful. Questioning. The response came immediately. And for the first time in 53 years, humans and something else achieved real communication. The patterns that appeared on their screens weren't random. They were structured. Language, mathematics, chemistry, physics. Information exchanged at a speed that seemed impossible. Sarah was recording everything, her hands shaking. This is real. This is actually happening. The transmission lasted 17 minutes. Then a new message appeared. Simple, direct. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. We have much to share. But first you must understand what we are, and why we've waited so long to speak. And then the lights appeared below them. Not bioluminescence, not volcanic glow, structured light, geometric patterns, rising from the trench below, coming closer. Something was ascending from the deepest part of the ocean, coming to meet them face to face. The lights rose slowly, deliberately. Sarah's hands flew across the controls, stabilizing the Orpheus at 11,000 meters. Through the viewport, the patterns grew clearer, not random, architectural, purposeful. Are you seeing this? James whispered into the communication link. On the surface, Chen's voice crackled back. We're receiving your video feed. The patterns are registering on sonar. Multiple contacts, large, moving information. Pierce's voice, tight with emotion. It's them. After 53 years, it's really them. The structures emerged from the darkness below. Not biological, not mechanical exactly. Something in between. Translucent surfaces that seemed to shift and adapt. Geometric forms that changed configuration as they moved through the water. They stopped 50 meters below the Orpheus. Holding position, waiting. Sarah adjusted the external cameras. Those structures are massive. Each one is the size of a city block. And there are dozens of them. The acoustic system activated on its own. The sphere pulsing with light. The transmission that followed bypassed their equipment entirely. It resonated directly through the water, through the hull, into their bodies. Not words. Understanding. Concepts downloaded directly into their minds. James gasped. The sensation was overwhelming. Like remembering something he'd never learned. History flooding into his consciousness. The entities below weren't alien. They were Earth natives. Older than humanity. Evolved in the deep ocean when life on land was still primitive. They'd developed intelligence while humans were still learning to walk upright. They'd watched, waited, observed. For millions of years, they'd existed in the depths, building civilizations in the crushing dark, developing technology that worked with water and pressure instead of fighting against it. They'd explored every trench, every deep ocean canyon, every place humans would never naturally reach. And they'd stayed hidden, deliberately, because they'd learned something fundamental about intelligent life. It needed space to grow, to make mistakes, to learn. They'd watched species rise and fall, seen evolution's experiments succeed and fail, and they'd followed one rule. Don't interfere. Let life find its own path. But something had changed. More concepts flooded in. Images, data, the ocean warming, chemistry changing, sounds increasing, human activity expanding into deeper waters, the world above affecting the world below in ways that couldn't be ignored anymore. The entities had reached a decision. Isolation was no longer possible. The surface and the depths were connected. What happened to one would affect the other. Communication had become necessary. So they'd waited for humans to develop the technology, to reach deep enough, to listen carefully enough. And in 1970, when the deep ecosystem activated, they'd finally had their chance. But humans had gotten scared, shut down the program, buried the evidence, chosen fear over curiosity. So they'd waited more, watching, hoping, sending occasional signals, testing to see if anyone was listening, until James bought a submarine, until the equipment woke up, until someone finally responded. The transmission ended. James and Sarah sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd experienced. Did that just happen? Sarah asked. Did we just download their entire history telepathically? I think so, James said. His mind was still reeling. They're not hostile. They're not invaders. They're natives. They were here first. Another signal came through, this time as text on their screens, adapting to their preferred communication method. We share this world. What affects the ocean affects all life. We must work together now. surface and depth. No more hiding. No more fear. Will you help us communicate with your world? Sarah looked at James. They're asking us to be ambassadors, to speak for them to the surface. Can we? James asked. Will anyone believe us? We have recordings, data, physical evidence, and they're right there. She gestured at the structures below. Visible, real, undeniable. James activated the communication link to the surface. Chen, Pierce, you getting all of this? Every word, Chen replied. And I've been transmitting to several marine research stations. We have independent verification of the sonar contacts. Whatever's down there, it's real and it's massive. Pierce's voice was thick with tears. I knew we hadn't imagined it. 53 years. I knew. Another message appeared on screen. We will rise slowly. Meet your surface vessels. Show ourselves to more of your people. But we need your help. Your world must understand we mean no harm. That we offer knowledge, partnership, a chance to heal the ocean that sustains all life. Sarah made a decision. Tell them yes. Tell them we'll help. James typed the response. Simple. Direct. Yes. We'll help. Welcome to the surface. The structures began to rise. Slowly. Deliberately. Following the Orpheus as it ascended. 3 hours back to the surface. 3 hours for the world to prepare for first contact with Earth's original intelligent species. During the ascent, more information came through. The entities shared data about ocean chemistry, about thermal patterns, about ecosystems humans had never discovered, about ways to restore balance to damaged areas, about technology that could clean pollution, harvest energy from currents, feed billions without depleting fish stocks. They were offering solutions to problems humanity had created. Not as punishment, not as judgment, just as neighbors helping neighbors fix a shared home. The Orpheus broke the surface at sunset. The support vessel's deck was crowded with people. The crew, scientists, and several new faces. Military observers, government officials, news cameras. Chen had made sure the world was watching. Sarah opened the hatch. Fresh air rushed in. Above them, helicopters circled. Ships approached from every direction. The story had spread faster than they'd expected, but everyone's attention was on the water behind the Orpheus, where the structures were emerging, rising from the depths like islands being born, translucent, beautiful, utterly alien and completely terrestrial at the same time. The entities weren't hiding anymore. First contact wasn't with beings from another planet, it was with neighbors from another depth, sharing the same world, finally ready to meet. James climbed out of the Orpheus and stood on the deck, watching history unfold, watching fear transform into wonder, watching the moment humanity learned it had never been alone. Sarah stood beside him. What happens now? Now, James said. Now we learn, we listen, we work together. The ocean's been trying to teach us for millions of years. Maybe it's time we started paying attention. Pierce and Chen joined them. 4 people who'd risked everything to answer a signal, to open a door that had been sealed for 53 years. Behind them, the entities floated peacefully, waiting, patient, ready to begin the next chapter of Earth's story. The sun set, the stars came out, and for the first time in human history, 2 intelligent species from the same planet stood together, looking up at the cosmos, not as aliens to each other, but as partners, neighbors, caretakers of a world they'd always shared but never acknowledged. The deep had called, and humanity had finally answered. 6 months later, James stood in a new facility built on the coast, part research station, part embassy, part school. Humans and the entities worked side by side, sharing knowledge, building technology, healing the ocean. The Razorback was there too, restored, transformed into a museum and active research vessel. The Deep Echo equipment in a place of honor. A reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries come from curiosity, from refusing to accept that something is impossible. Sarah directed a team of scientists, studying, learning, translating concepts from the deep into languages the surface could understand. Chen and Pierce taught history, told the story of Operation Spectre, made sure future generations understood the cost of choosing fear over communication, and the entities shared freely. Water purification systems that needed no power, materials that cleaned pollution while strengthening structures, ways to farm the ocean without depleting it. Technology that worked with nature instead of against it. The world was changing. Not overnight, but steadily. Two species learning to cooperate, to share, to protect their common home. Ellen Henderson visited once, stood before a memorial to the 16 men who died in operations the government buried, her son's name carved in stone alongside the truth about how he died. He would have loved this, she said to James. Daniel always believed in looking beyond the obvious, in finding answers instead of accepting silence. They all would have, James replied. He walked to the water's edge. One of the entities was there, its form shifting gently in the shallows. They'd learned to adapt, to exist in depths humans could reach, to meet halfway. It pulsed with light. A greeting. A question. James responded using the portable interface they'd developed. A conversation between species that had lived on the same planet for millions of years but only just learned to talk. Thank you for waiting, James transmitted. Thank you for giving us another chance. The response came as feeling more than words. Understanding, forgiveness, hope. Two intelligent species, one world, infinite possibilities. The sun set over the ocean. The water glowed softly with the lights of the deep, and somewhere in the darkness, more entities were rising, more neighbors coming to meet the surface, to share, to teach, to learn. The door had opened, and it would never close again.